In 2011, a small rental house in Gary, Indiana, became the center of one of the most disturbing paranormal cases in modern American history. At first, it looked like a normal house. A small white home on Carolina Street. Nothing unusual about it. But the family that moved into that house would soon claim that they weren't living there alone. They said something else was inside the house. Something that could move objects. Something that whispered in the dark. And according to multiple witnesses, including doctors and police officers, whatever lived there didn't behave like a ghost. It behaved like something much darker. Because inside that house, a young boy allegedly walked backwards up a hospital wall. And when investigators looked into the case, they began to suspect that the family wasn't dealing with a haunting. They were dealing with something far worse. In November of 2011, a woman named LaToya Ammons moved into a small rental home in Gary, Indiana, with her 3 children and her mother. The house itself looked completely ordinary. 2 stories, old wooden floors, a small basement. At first, everything seemed fine. The family unpacked their belongings, arranged their furniture, and began settling into their new home. But within days, something strange started happening. Late at night, LaToya's mother began hearing footsteps. Not quiet footsteps, heavy footsteps, as if someone was slowly walking through the hallway. But when she opened the door to check, the hallway was empty. At first, they assumed it was just the house settling. Old houses often make strange noises, but the noises didn't stop. In fact, they started getting worse. The first signs. One night, LaToya's mother woke up suddenly. She heard something moving in the living room. Slow footsteps, pacing across the floor. She walked toward the doorway and looked into the dark hallway. And that's when she saw it. A tall, shadowy figure standing in the living room. She couldn't see its face, but she knew someone, or something, was standing there. The moment she turned on the light, the figure disappeared, completely gone. She tried to convince herself that she had imagined it, but the next morning, something even stranger happened. Hundreds of black flies appeared inside the house. They covered the windows. They crawled across the walls. They buzzed through every room. Normally, flies appear during warm weather, but this was winter, and outside, it was freezing. No one could explain where the flies were coming from. The children change. Soon, the children began acting strangely. LaToya noticed that her youngest daughter started talking to people who weren't there. Sometimes she would stare into empty corners of the room and whisper. Other times she would scream in the middle of the night. But the most disturbing change happened to her son. His behavior became aggressive and unpredictable. Sometimes he would speak in a deep voice that didn't sound like his own. Other times he claimed that dark figures were walking through the house. One night, the children woke up screaming. LaToya rushed into their room, and what she saw terrified her. Her youngest child was levitating above the bed. The girl's body was lifted several inches into the air. She was shaking violently. LaToya grabbed her daughter and pulled her down. But the child continued screaming about shadow figures watching them. At that moment, LaToya knew something was very wrong. Eventually, things became so disturbing that LaToya decided to take her children to the hospital. She hoped doctors could explain what was happening. At first, the hospital staff believed the children were simply experiencing psychological stress. But during the visit, something happened that shocked everyone present. LaToya's 9-year-old son suddenly began growling. His eyes rolled back into his head. Doctors and nurses gathered around the room. Then the boy suddenly stood up and slowly began walking backwards. He reached the wall and continued walking up the wall. Witnesses later said the boy walked several feet up the hospital wall while facing backwards. It looked impossible, like gravity had stopped working. Nurses screamed. Doctors froze in disbelief. Even a police officer who was present later stated in his report that he had never seen anything like it before. The hospital quickly contacted Child Protective Services, but the investigation would soon take a much darker turn. 7 police officers and social workers began investigating the house. At first, they assumed the family was exaggerating. But strange things began happening even during the investigation. One officer reported that his audio recorder captured unexplained voices. Another investigator claimed that photographs taken inside the house showed dark figures that hadn't been visible at the time. And multiple people reported feeling intense dread the moment they stepped inside the home. Eventually, the family contacted a Catholic priest. After hearing their story, the priest believed the case might involve demonic oppression. The exorcisms. The priest began performing exorcisms on LaToya. During these sessions, the activity became more violent. LaToya screamed in pain. Her voice changed, and at times she claimed she could see dark figures surrounding her. The priest later stated that the house might contain hundreds of demonic entities. Each exorcism made the activity worse. Furniture moved on its own. Objects were thrown across rooms. And the children continued describing shadow figures inside the house. Eventually, the priest told the family they had to leave immediately. The terrifying end. The family finally moved out of the house, but the story didn't end there. The house became known as the Demon House of Gary. Paranormal investigators continued studying the property for years. Some claimed that even standing inside the house made them feel sick. Others reported hearing whispers coming from empty rooms. Finally, in 2016, the house was demolished, torn down completely. But some investigators believe that destroying the building didn't end the haunting. Because sometimes, when something evil attaches itself to a place, it doesn't disappear when the house is gone. Sometimes, it just finds a new place to hide. And if the reports from Gary, Indiana are true, whatever lived inside that house may still be out there, waiting. In the early 1990s, a young couple moved into a quiet house in a small town in Kansas. At first, it seemed like the perfect place to start a new life. The neighborhood was peaceful, the house was affordable, and nothing about it seemed unusual. But within weeks of moving in, the man living there began waking up with deep scratches across his chest. Furniture started moving by itself. Lights turned on in empty rooms, and something invisible began attacking him in the middle of the night. Paranormal investigators later called it one of the most violent hauntings in America. But the most disturbing part of the story was the identity of the spirit believed to live inside that house. Because according to local legend, the house wasn't haunted by an angry adult. It was haunted by the ghost of a little girl named Sally. Or at least, that's what the spirit wanted people to believe. In 1993, a young couple named Tony and Deborah Pickman moved into a small house in Atchison, Kansas. The house itself looked normal. It was a modest 2-story home built decades earlier. Nothing about it seemed strange or unusual. In fact, the couple had no idea the house had a reputation. They simply thought they had found a good place to live. But on their very first night in the house, something strange happened. Tony woke up suddenly around 2 a.m. He thought he heard something moving downstairs. At first, he assumed it was just the house settling. But the sound didn't stop. It sounded like someone walking slowly across the living room floor. Tony grabbed a flashlight and walked downstairs to check. But when he reached the living room, the house was completely empty. No open doors, no broken windows, nothing. He shrugged it off and went back to bed. But this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the couple began noticing strange things happening around the house. Small objects would disappear. Keys, pens, kitchen utensils. Sometimes they would find these objects days later, sitting in the middle of the floor. Lights began turning on and off by themselves. Cabinet doors would open during the night. And sometimes they heard the sound of a child giggling somewhere in the house. At first, Tony tried to explain everything logically. Old houses often make strange noises. Electrical systems can malfunction. But then something happened that he couldn't explain. One morning, Tony woke up with 3 deep scratches across his chest. They looked fresh, like they had just been made. But Tony had no memory of injuring himself. At first, he thought maybe he had scratched himself in his sleep, but the scratches kept appearing, night after night, and each time, they became deeper. Eventually, the activity inside the house became much more violent. Tony began waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was watching him. Sometimes he felt pressure on his chest, like something invisible was sitting on top of him. Other times, he felt something pulling on his legs under the blanket. One night, Tony woke up suddenly after feeling a burning pain across his stomach. When he turned on the light, he saw fresh scratches forming on his skin, right in front of his eyes. Deep red marks slowly appearing, as if something invisible was clawing him. Deborah watched in horror as the marks grew deeper. But there was nothing there, nothing they could see. That was the moment they realized they might not be alone in the house. Eventually, the couple contacted paranormal investigators. The investigators began researching the history of the house, and what they discovered was disturbing. According to local legend, decades earlier, a small girl named Sally had died in that house. The story claimed she had been taken there by her parents for emergency surgery. But the doctor began the operation before the anesthesia had taken effect. The girl woke up during the surgery, terrified and in pain. And according to the legend, she died on the operating table. Paranormal investigators believed her spirit might still be trapped inside the house. But when they began their investigation, they noticed something strange. The activity didn't behave like a child. It behaved like something much darker. As the investigation continued, the attacks on Tony became more violent. One night, he woke up screaming. Deborah turned on the light and saw something horrifying. Tony had long claw marks across his stomach and arms. It looked like an animal had attacked him, but there was nothing in the room. Investigators placed cameras around the house. They recorded strange noises, footsteps, whispers, and occasionally, objects moving by themselves. One investigator later said that the energy inside the house felt extremely aggressive, like something inside the house was angry and focused entirely on Tony. Eventually, some investigators came to a disturbing conclusion. They believed the entity inside the house was not actually the ghost of a little girl. Instead, they believed it was something pretending to be one. A darker entity using the story of Sally to manipulate the people living there. Because demonic entities are often believed to disguise themselves as children. The more time Tony spent inside the house, the worse the attacks became. Until eventually, the couple decided they had no choice. They had to leave. Tony and Deborah eventually moved out of the house, but the haunting didn't end. Over the years, many investigators visited the Sally house, and many of them reported the same things: strange voices, moving objects, cold spots, and an overwhelming feeling that something inside the house was watching them. Even today, the house in Atchison, Kansas is considered one of the most haunted houses in America. People who visit the house claim they still hear footsteps at night, and sometimes they hear the faint sound of a child laughing. But those who have studied the case closely warn that the spirit inside the house might not be a child at all, because sometimes the most dangerous spirits are the ones that pretend to be harmless. So if you ever find yourself visiting Atchison, Kansas, and someone offers to take you inside the Sally house, you might want to think twice. Because the people who have spent the night there say one thing is always certain. At some point, you'll feel like someone is standing right behind you, watching, and waiting for the lights to go out. In 1817, a quiet farming family in Tennessee began experiencing something that no one could explain. At first, it seemed harmless. Strange noises in the walls, scratching sounds under the floor, footsteps in empty rooms. But within months, the invisible presence inside their home began speaking. It knew the family's secrets. It called itself Kate. And over the next 3 years, this entity would torment the Bell family so violently that hundreds of people traveled to witness the haunting. Even future U.S. President Andrew Jackson reportedly came to investigate the strange events. But what happened during his visit would convince him that whatever haunted the Bell family was something beyond human understanding. Because according to witnesses, this entity didn't just haunt the Bell family. It eventually killed the man it hated most. In the early 1800s, John Bell lived with his family on a farm near Adams, Tennessee. The Bells were respected members of their community. John Bell was a successful farmer. His family attended church regularly. Their life was quiet and ordinary, until one evening in 1817, when John Bell saw something strange near his cornfield. Standing near the edge of the field was a strange animal. It looked like a dog, but something about it was wrong. Its head looked unusually large. Its body moved strangely. When John raised his rifle and fired at the creature, it disappeared instantly, as if it had never been there. At first, John thought it was simply a trick of the light. But the strange sightings didn't stop. Soon after the sighting, the Bell family began hearing strange noises inside their house. Late at night, they heard scratching sounds coming from the walls. Other times it sounded like chains dragging across the floor. Sometimes the sound was so loud, it woke the entire family. John searched the house repeatedly, but every time he looked for the source of the noise, he found nothing. No animals, no broken boards, no explanation. But the disturbances continued, night after night. Soon the haunting became more aggressive. The Bell children began waking up screaming. They claimed something invisible was pulling their blankets off the bed. Other times they felt someone slapping them while they slept. But the worst attacks were directed at John Bell's daughter, Betsy Bell. She often woke up with her hair pulled violently. Sometimes invisible hands slapped her face, and the attacks seemed to grow stronger each night. Then one night, something impossible happened. The family heard a voice. It came from somewhere inside the house, but they couldn't see anyone speaking. At first, the voice whispered quietly, but over time, it began speaking clearly. The voice introduced itself as Kate. The entity soon began speaking to the Bell family regularly. It answered questions. It sang songs. And sometimes, it mocked the people living in the house. The voice could be heard in every room. Sometimes it sounded like a woman. Other times it sounded like multiple voices speaking together. But the most disturbing part was that the entity seemed to know everything about the Bell family. It knew private conversations, secrets no one else should have known, and it often revealed information about people who lived miles away. Soon, word of the haunting spread across Tennessee. Curious visitors began arriving at the Bell farm, and many of them claimed they heard the voice themselves. Eventually, the story reached Andrew Jackson, who at the time was a famous military leader. Curious about the strange reports, Jackson decided to visit the Bell farm with several companions. But according to legend, they experienced something strange before even reaching the house. While traveling toward the Bell farm, their wagon suddenly stopped moving. The horses refused to move forward. No matter how hard they tried, the wagon wouldn't budge. Then suddenly, a voice spoke from the darkness. It said, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you tonight." Jackson later reportedly said, "By the Eternal, this must be the Bell Witch." That night, Jackson and his men stayed at the Bell house. But the entity continued tormenting the visitors. One of Jackson's companions began boasting that he could control witches. But suddenly, he was thrown violently across the room by an invisible force. Jackson reportedly fled the house the next morning, later saying he would rather fight the entire British Army again than spend another night with the Bell Witch. For years, the entity continued tormenting the Bell family. But it seemed to have a particular hatred for John Bell. The voice constantly threatened him. Sometimes it whispered that it would eventually kill him. Then, in 1820, John Bell suddenly became very ill. His health deteriorated quickly. He suffered strange symptoms: weakness, seizures, confusion. One morning, the family discovered a small, mysterious bottle near his bed. No one knew where it came from. The entity's voice suddenly spoke, claiming responsibility. It said it had poisoned John Bell. Soon after, John Bell died, making him the only known person in American history reportedly killed by a ghost. After John Bell's death, the entity claimed its work was finished. Before leaving, it made a strange promise. The voice said it would return in 7 years, and according to some accounts, it did. But the haunting was never as violent as before. Today, the story of the Bell Witch remains one of the most famous paranormal cases in American history. And near the old Bell property, there is a place known as the Bell Witch Cave. Visitors who enter the cave often report strange sounds echoing from deep inside the darkness. Some claim they hear whispers. Others say they feel like someone is watching them, waiting. So if you ever find yourself traveling through rural Tennessee and someone offers to show you the Bell Witch Cave, you might want to remember one thing. According to legend, the entity that haunted the Bell family never truly disappeared. Because sometimes, when something ancient attaches itself to a place, it doesn't leave. It just waits. And in the darkness of that cave, some people believe the Bell Witch is still there, listening and waiting for someone new to enter her home.